Jeff Presslaff. I play in the Winnipeg Jazz Orchestra. I usually play trombone, but I also play some piano. I'm here to tell you the one thing you must know to solo over chord changes. And I want to emphasize that it's not the only thing you can know. It's a lifetime's work to learn how to do this. But if you know this one thing, the rest of your exploration will make much more sense and will be much easier to do. So here goes. I modestly call this Presslaff's law, and it goes something like this. In actual or implied polyphony, there are in notes and there are out notes. An in note can be followed by any note or nothing. An out note must move by step to an in note. And that's it, okay? You can actually reduce that to a much simpler thing, and then it becomes the one thing that you must know, which is that an out note must move by step to an in note. That's really the only thing you ever have to do, and all your melodies will sound like they go with chord changes. Now let's just define our terms a little bit. In jazz and some other musics, chords are used to divide the world into in notes and out notes. In notes are notes that are already sounding in the chord, and out notes are all the rest of the notes. Okay? In jazz, we use chord symbols to tell you in advance which notes are going to be in, and that's very useful information. Okay, so here goes. If you have a chord and you want to have a melody that goes with that chord, then you can play either in notes or out notes. All right? And the reason they sound in is because they're in the chord, and the reason they sound out is because they're out of the chord. Okay, now if you're going to make coherent melodies, then what happens is, if you play an in note, the next note you can play is anything, say another in note, or nothing. It's done. All right? If you play an out note, then lead it by step to an in note. And it sounds like you've played a melody that goes with that chord. So here are a few implications of this law. Okay? One very important one is that your lines or phrases have to end on an in note, because only in notes can be followed by nothing. If you end a line on an out note, then it sounds pretty much like either you're not finished or you made a mistake. But if you end on an in note, then it sounds like you've finished. So that's very important. And a corollary to that is somewhat psychological, which is that, especially for inexperienced players, but also sometimes for experienced players, if you play a note that sounds really terrible, your first reaction is to panic and stop playing. But that's the only thing you should never do. If you play a note that sounds awful to you, then you must keep playing it and then lead it by step, and then you'll sound like you really know what you're doing. In fact, you may even sound brilliant, right? You may sound like you're doing something very unusual. All right, and then that really sour note becomes a really interesting note. Okay, something else that this means is that you can do this entirely by ear by the following process. If you play any random note, that note will either, by definition, be in or out. If your ear tells you that it's in, I can't reach that. There we go. my ear tells me that's in. That means the next note I play can be any note. It also means that I've learned one of the notes in the chord. Okay? If I play a random note and it's out, then I can hear that it's out, and I know that I lead by step to in. Okay? So I don't even have to know what the chord changes are. I can do this entirely by ear. When you're learning your instrument, the most important interval that you need to know is a step. You must know what the steps are on your instrument. And by a step, I mean any two notes that are next to each other on the chromatic scale, or any two notes that are next to each other in a diatonic scale. So what we're talking about is half steps and whole steps. So the first theory you must learn and the first thing you must learn on your instrument is what all the steps are, because that means that you can play any note and you can either leave it because it's an in note, or you can move it by step. In other words, the only time you must move is by step. So it stands to reason that the interval that you should be a master of is the step. Another way of looking at this is when you're playing lines, you can lead to chord tones on the downbeat. That's a very powerful idea. 1, 2, 3, 4. 2, 3, 4. Okay, so you're using out notes to lead to in notes on the downbeat. And that's it. That's all you need to know. And I want to add one more thing. There are no good jazz soloists, no matter what instrument they play, who don't play piano. We all play piano, if only to be able to experiment with this relationship. You don't have to be a great piano player. You don't ever have to play piano in public, but go to a piano, play the chord, try to make melodies that go with the chord, and you'll be playing the game. Thank you very much.
Ayo!